is Jake Hager, who I joked on the air, and I was like, you can tell he saved his money the way that he was reviewing a match that one of his bosses, his former bosses, had at Crown Jewel. Says that he hopes to fight several times a year. We're going to get James's insight on his conversation with Jake, but they aired a commercial during Raw for Bellator, which I think was a wise decision. Jake Hager, never the biggest star in pro wrestling, James, but was a world champion, beat Chris Jericho to become a world champion, was a Mr. Money in the Bank, got a title match at WrestleMania, had a gimmick that would be much better placed present day than it was then, but they targeted that pro wrestling audience savvy on the side of Bellator, in my opinion.
Yeah, good move on their part. Got to get that crowd in there. I mean, there will be people that will just watch this card that are pro wrestling fans because they're curious to see how he does. And the one narrative I'm sort of seeing online, which I think is completely wrong, is people comparing this situation to CM Punk. And clearly, I mean, the huge difference between the two is that Hager obviously had an NCAA wrestling background, whereas CM Punk did not. So I think, if anything, this is going to be more like Brock Lesnar making his UFC debut than it would be with CM Punk. So I'm expecting big things. This should be interesting. I mean, the thing is, people look at this and they say, oh, he's 36 years old and, you know, what's the ceiling here? But I mean, that's young for heavyweight. We've got guys in their 40s still fighting at heavyweight. So I think this is it was a great move by Bellator. Clearly, Jake could have gone to the UFC, but he opted to go Bellator instead. I think he likes what they're doing, especially with the fact that they really have focused on getting these NCAA, high-level collegiate wrestlers on their roster. So I think it's a big win for them. And what a way to put them on this card after they lost Mousasi and Lovato Jr.
Yeah, I think it was a good move, and a lot of people talk about the pro wrestling aspect of this, and he told you, James, that R-Truth may play him to the cage. I don't know if that will actually end up happening because, as we've seen in the past, CM Punk was supposed to accompany Chael Sonnen to the UFC cage, and Vince McMahon said, somebody's going to die in there one day. And then months later, Triple H and Batista are walking, I think, Pacquiao and Mayweather respectively to the ring in boxing matches. But you want to talk about Jake Hager, and we don't know a lot about him. He says that he's a better striker than Brock Lesnar. Wouldn't take much, but beyond his wrestling accolades, the guy was a two-sport athlete. He was recruited to the University of Oklahoma to play football as well. And the only people ahead of him were eventual NFL players. So, I mean, that is a special kind of athleticism as well. We mentioned the heavyweight aspect of that, Joe. He's facing a guy in J.W. Kaiser who nobody here is going to know. Like, nobody watching this show is probably going to know anything about J.W. Kaiser, his history, anything like that. He's a one-on-one pro. I think that is an okay way to debut Jake Hager. Now, that being said, J.W. Kaiser does have, I think, 18, 19, 20 amateur fights. What does that mean, if anything, to you, Joe?
Well, it means it's much better in his favor when you take a look at, people don't respect the amateur side of mixed martial arts, but it's important to note that is ring time, that is cage time, that is understanding, preparing, getting in there, and a cage door being shut, and it's just you, your opponent, and a referee. So that does play it. But I like the point that you made about, Jake's an athlete. Right, the athleticism. Now, back in the day, I remember the Ultimate Fighter 10, if I'm not mistaken, the heavyweights. There were some athletes on there with Brendan Schaub, and there were some other guys on there that you'd say, you know what, if you can bring that type of athleticism, especially in the heavyweight division, to mixed martial arts, and especially in a division where you don't have to be as technical as guys in the smaller weight classes, it can help you a lot. But athleticism will only take you so far. You still have to be a fighter. Derek Lewis, he's a fighter, okay? You still have to have heart. Derek Lewis has heart. Lots of these guys have heart. Heart is not something that can be taught. You either have it or you don't. Now, it can come with experience, but some guys and girls have much more of it than don't. So even though it's Jake's debut, he is fighting a guy with some sort of experience here, and you'll have to play it correctly, play it smart, and understand that, we saw what happened this past weekend in the co-main event where, there's only so much you can do. If you don't have stamina, you don't have cardio, you don't have heart, we'll see what happens. Now, don't get me wrong. In the co-main event, we saw disqualification. We'll get to that in a little bit. But I'm very interested in seeing, what Hager brings to the cage. And I'm also pleasantly surprised that the two of you, as well as me, kind of look at Bellator and say, you know what? Smart move. Very smart move in the advertising. So, and I do want to say one thing about the professional wrestling and the fact that James and I don't really follow it much, don't write about it much, don't talk about it much. My wife broke the news to me last night, Sean, that she's like, hey, I'm thinking of buying some tickets for Thomas for when that wrestling stuff comes to Toronto. I said, what? We're going to put him in. You want to send him to a WWE event?
Got 4 straight nights of it in August.
What's that?
4 straight nights of it in August.
May have to reach out to you to see if you get some connections on tickets, my friend.
Probably could. This Bellator show is prominently featuring Jack Swagger, obviously. James, you were able to speak to him. What kind of mindset did you get out of him as he's leading up to his MMA debut? Because this has been a long time coming.
I found him to be fairly confident. I think that comes with him having competed in collegiate wrestling and then in the WWE as well. I mean, for a lot of fighters, this is pretty nerve-wracking. You're switching sports. You're in a big promotion in Bellator. It's not like he's, making his debut for Wild Bill's Fight Night or something like that, right? So, and this is actually a pretty big card too. With he's a heavyweight making his heavyweight debut, his MMA debut on the same card as one of the greatest heavyweights of all time, in Fedor Emelianenko. So it just seems to me like he's confident. He likes the way he's doing his training. Interestingly enough, I'm going to throw a name out here that you guys will probably haven't heard in forever. Josh Rafferty. Remember him? Fought in the Ultimate Fighter Season 1?
I have heard that name. So funny you mentioned that when you mentioned Jack Swagger or he mentioned to you that he had done some training with him. The thing is, I had long forgotten that I knew that name from MMA because he's associated with a lot of pro wrestlers these days.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
He helps train Sheamus and several pro wrestlers actually. So when I heard that, my mind made the connection and I thought, oh, of course. But yeah, Josh Rafferty, tell us some more about this.
Well, just that he's been working with him and it seems to pay well. And that friendship has gone, it's been around for a while because, of course, he has ties to Ohio. That's where obviously Josh Rafferty is from. So they've been working together. So I found that interesting because Josh Rafferty was one of those guys where he was on the Ultimate Fighter. I think he won a fight or two and then you just never heard from him again. So to hear that name, because, I'm an OG when it comes to the Ultimate Fighter, that was what got me into MMA was that first season. So when he said Josh Rafferty, obviously my ears perked up. But I thought that was interesting that Josh is, doing more of the coaching stuff. And I just, the sense I got from Jake, just speaking to him is just that he's well prepared. He knows what he's going in for. He's not an idiot. Like he knows obviously that, in any fight, there's always a danger of losing. But I just sensed a confidence. I didn't sense like a nervousness or anxiety or anything like that. It just seemed like he's really ready for this and he's ready to seize the moment. And the other thing I took away was just that he was very impressed with Bellator. Like I think, we can't understate the fact that he could have gone elsewhere, but he chose to go with Bellator.
Few names that I'm pretty sure Josh Rafferty has worked with. Davey Boy Smith Jr., who is a Billy Robinson disciple and a member of the famous Hart wrestling family. Dave Batista and Sheamus in WWE. There are several. He's very, very tight-knit in the pro wrestling community in that regard. This show starts off with, why is this happening? A 5-6 Brandon McMahon facing Adel El Tamini. Why? Why, Joe? What, James? Anybody? What?
We just finished.
Someone must have dirt on Coker.
Bellator. We just finished complimenting them and doing a good job. And I was just, after I said that, I went back to you guys and I looked at the beginning of the card at the featherweight. I'm like, nah, guys, really?
I mean, you have Desmond Torres. He's 5-1. You have Steve Ramirez. He's 6-3. They're both flyweights. So Bellator putting on a flyweight fight. I think from a PR standpoint, that fight would make a hell of a lot of sense above this one. Bellator could say, hey, we'll book you flyweights. If you want to come over here, we'll start a new division if the UFC is not going to continue it. You have, I don't know, just looking at the card, James Barnes, 11-3, Ryan Lilly, 9-4. From the outside looking in, that seems like it makes more sense as well.
Yeah, James Barnes actually just defeated Albert Morales, the UFC veteran, on that Golden Boy card. So there is a bit of a tie there. And Ryan Lilly, pretty much, if he would have won his last fight, he would have been fighting for an LFA title. But he fought Rafion Stotts, who's just a top bantamweight out of Rufus Sport. So this is the fight to me. The Barnes and Lilly fight is the one that should be on the main card. It makes no sense to me. They're both local guys too. Lilly's trained by Boss Rutan. There's a lot of sort of tie-ins there that would be a good fight for like a hometown fight because both these guys are California guys. But why is a 5-6 Brandon McMahon and unless he's related to Ed McMahon, I don't see a reason why Brandon McMahon is on the main card here.
I can call Lex McMahon and ask if you want.
There you go. Yeah, exactly. That's true. Yeah.
Well, one fight I am excited about is Juan Archuleta, 21-1, taking on Ricky and Bandejas. Ricky debuted in August, I believe it was. And Juan Archuleta just had an amazing 2018. He went from not even being in the company. He had that fight with Zach Church that was canceled. He stepped in and fought a guy in William Joplin, who was a 50-50 fighter at best. But he beat Robbie Peralta, Jeremy Spoon. I think after this, if Juan Archuleta is able to get a win, and he's riding, I think, 16 straight wins, if he's able to pull this one off, you got to give him a top flight fight in Bellator. If he stepped in and in 11 months, Joe, won 4 fights in a row, 4-0 in Bellator, you got to give him that step up.
Well, it's very, very easy to promote in that type of scenario. Just take exactly what you just said, clip it, and give it to Bellator. It's very simple. And you're dealing with a guy with that type of a win streak. Yeah, he deserves, top contenders at least, or someone in that, where he can be a fight or two away from a title shot, because you don't just do that and not have some success and not show that you've got some skills. So I agree 100% with what you just said.
Ricky, on the other hand, has had trouble getting in the cage, getting people to fight him. I think he had 5 fights canceled in 11 months. It was unbelievable across Ring of Combat and Cage Fury. James, when you see this matchup, and he is most famous for knocking out James Gallagher, what are you expecting out of this? Because you have a guy who made his name off of a really good moment in Ricky Bandejas, and then you have Juan Archuleta, who is just a firecracker in this division.
There's so many things to talk about with this fight. First off, let me say this potentially could be fight of the night here. This is just great matchmaking. You've got Bandejas coming off a huge win over Gallagher. Those in the know, people like myself, knew that Ricky Bandejas shouldn't have been an underdog against James Gallagher. He had the experience going into that. He'd fought more at 35. I mean, Ricky is talented, and they've got a really good blue chip prospect here, 27 years old, really good fighter. So there's that. And then you've got Juan Archuleta, who hasn't fought at bantamweight since December of 2016. He's actually fought as high as 160, as low as bantamweight. So he's all over the place. But you mentioned those wins in Bellator. I think the one thing we can all agree on, though, the Peralta win obviously looks good because Peralta was a UFC vet, but not really strong competition. So let's see how he does against someone who clearly has a good resume, has a good record. I mean, Archuleta has the experience, but Bandejas has looked great, and he's got some really good wins here. If you look at his resume here for Bandejas, he actually has a win over UFC bantamweight Merab Dvalishvili. He's got a win over CES bantamweight champion Tony Gravely. So all the wins he has are pretty legit, and Archuleta has some good wins too. But I think if you look at Bandejas, he's pretty much only fought top guys. And then Archuleta, the other thing with him is he just comes from a great camp. He's one of TJ Dillashaw's main training partners. Aaron Pico trains there as well. He does a little bit of work with them. Listen to this. This is who's going to be cornering Archuleta this Saturday. This is like an all-star team here. Joe Daddy Stevenson, Cub Swanson, TJ Dillashaw. Like, it doesn't get any better than that for corner advice. So Archuleta has, just so many good training partners, so many options as far as who he gets to work with in his camps. This is a close fight. I mean, I would slightly lean Bandejas just because I think he has shown more at 35 than Archuleta has, and I think he's fought tougher guys. But Archuleta, like you said, has the experience. And here's the other thing, guys. The winner of this, I have no doubt, is probably going to fight for the title next. But of course, as Joe knows, they're probably doing that Horiguchi and Caldwell rematch in Bellator first. So I don't know if one of these guys wants to wait around for that. But either way, I think the winner of this should be up for a title shot next, just with their records.
Speaking of potential title shots, you have Aaron Pico, who is 4-1. Boy, has that been a 180 from his debut against Zach Freeman. It's unbelievable, the trajectory that he has taken and the level of talent that he's facing as well. He stepped in there against Zach Freeman, who was a questionable booking because of his experience level to begin with, lost, and then he's like, no, I want to go right back to fighting guys that are even tougher than Zach Freeman. And we've seen it. Shane Crutchton, Leandro Higo, man, that was an incredible win. If he beats Henry Corrales, Joe, does Aaron Pico get a title shot a year and a half after he became a pro fighter?
Depends if they want to rush him or not, right? You can make the argument.
Apparently.
What's that?
Wants to rush himself, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, it all depends on what the goal is with Aaron Pico. They know they've got James mentioned a blue chip prospect here. Here's a guy that's done absolutely fantastic, with the exception of his debut that took all of us by surprise with that loss. I mean, that thing lasted not even 30 seconds, and we were like, okay, got a bit of a problem here. And he rebounds with 4 straight wins. None of his fights have gone past the first round. I mean, his longest fight was 3 minutes and 45 seconds, which was that second fight. So I would like to see I know it could be difficult, but I want to see this guy's heart tested just to see what'll happen when everything he throws at someone doesn't work. And now he's got to sit there, and mix and match a style or figure out, you got to go to plan B potentially. So I think with a win here, bringing himself to 5-1, you can make the argument that this guy's, it is Bellator. You just never know, but he's got the skills. I think, Zach Freeman should either make a decision whether he wants that fight back or wants to give him a rematch or not. But yeah, Pico's something else, though. He is something special for sure.
James, where do you stand on this one? I mean, Pico is very good. It's impressive. You can draw a lot of parallels between he and Henry Cejudo in a lot of different manners. I mean, the level of improvement that we've seen, he's downright scary. He's knocking people out. Bellator has really lucked out with a lot of these wrestlers that they've converted over to MMA, because it seems like they just snatched up all of them that have this power in their hands as well. They've looked like they've struck gold with him.
Yeah, a lot of things to talk about here. It's kind of like interesting matchmaking because you have Pico, who, like I said, has resurrected himself from the debut loss, and he's fighting a guy in Henry Corrales, who's probably the most underrated featherweight in that division. Henry Corrales started his Bellator career off 0-3. Who were his first three opponents, you ask? Daniel Strauss, Emmanuel Sanchez, and Patricio Pitbull. Once he, got rid of those cobwebs, he went on a 4-fight win streak. His last fight, an impressive finish over Andy Main, who's on the Ultimate Fighter. He's also got a win over Georgi Karahakian. Comes from a good camp at the lab. He's a vet. I mean, this is a good matchup here. Can Henry get to that next level, get to that title shot, get that rematch with Pitbull? We'll see. He's got to fight Aaron Pico. And one thing I'll disagree with you there, I'd say that Pico's competition leading up to the Higo fight actually wasn't that great. The guy that he fought in Justin Lin was a bantamweight, moved up to featherweight. Crutchin hadn't fought in 2 years when he fought Pico. Lee Morrison, 18-8 record, but not really like an outstanding guy. The Higo fight for me was good. But again, you could point to the fact that Higo is a bantamweight and moved up a weight class, and it's not really his weight class. But let's pretend that, Higo, that was a good win, got finished in the first round. It's interesting because Corrales, if the one thing you can look at here, he's a tough guy to finish. He's been submitted twice in his career, but other than that, he's been a guy that's really hard to take out. So if Pico can't get that quick finish, will he be able to do enough to get a decision here? I think Pico's going to win. I just think younger guy, 22 years old, a little bit more movement, always can go back to the wrestling. I mean, if this turns into a wrestling match, clearly Pico would win the fight. But you can't sleep on Henry Corrales here because, again, I think his body of work, the guys that he's fought, that experience, you can't put that into a training camp. Pico's, like I mentioned, trains with Dillashaw and Juan Archuleta, but he also trains at the Body Shop with AJ McKee. So again, getting some outstanding training partners here, very confident. The question is, the winner of this fight, do they get a title shot? You've also got AJ McKee out there, and that's the interesting thing too. Pico says that he'll never fight McKee. He pretty much said that when I spoke to him. So you've got kind of this interesting thing. Would Pico have to move up to 55 again? We'll see what happens. So there's a lot of options at featherweight, but this fight is very important for the division, and I can't wait.
So it's funny that you mentioned the Henry Corrales 3 losses: Daniel Strauss, Emmanuel Sanchez, Patricky Pitbull. Bellator is usually quick on the trigger to fire people in some instances. What did they do? They scheduled another fight for Corrales. He was supposed to fight AJ McKee after all that, if you remember.
That's right,
like, man. Yeah. That poor guy. But he's come back and he's had those great wins, including Georgi Karahakian. I should specify, when I meant the level of competition against Pico, I'm talking like an 0-1 guy fighting a 7-3 guy.
True. Yeah. No, you're right.
A guy in his second fight facing Shane Crutchin, who was on a hot streak until a couple of years ago. So, I mean, that's more of what I meant. But for his skill level, it was definitely on the level. This is one that I can't wait for. Henry Corrales is a guy who 3 years ago, just under 3 years ago, we were talking about right before Fightful launched, actually. I was surprised that he got that fight against Cody Bollinger. And now he's come back and won 4 in a row, and he is in the conversation. I'm ready to have this conversation because I'm just ready for this fight. This is a fight that I never expected to happen. Ever. And never thought I would be excited for. We're talking about Ryan Bader as a heavyweight and a damn good one facing Fedor Emelianenko. Where do we begin? Well, first off, I just want to say Ryan Bader should have gotten a light heavyweight title shot against Daniel Cormier. I feel robbed of that fight. And before that, there was all the you can't market it, you can't do this, you can't do that. Apparently could have marketed it at either division. I don't care if it was a heavyweight or light heavyweight. Joe, I remember when we covered it and we were both sold the night that Ryan Bader crashed the press
It
conference.
was awesome.
I was like, he did it. He took it into his own hands and he made it his own. I don't think that I'm not sure, but I don't think that we ever saw him in the UFC again. Maybe we saw the Nog fight. I can't remember if that's before or after, but he would go to Bellator. And since going to Bellator, Phil Davis, Linton Vassell, King Mo, Matt Mitrione. That's unbelievable. You got Phil Davis, a pretty big light heavyweight. You have Linton Vassell, who is a heavyweight now. King Mo, who has had quite a bit of success at heavyweight on his own. And then you got Matt Mitrione. But Ryan Bader's facing Fedor Emelianenko. And Fedor faced a way overmatched Chael Sonnen. But in what I saw in some of those grappling exchanges, outside of that ridiculous roll through that Chael Sonnen did, was Fedor still having some of those instincts. A lot of the times with Fedor, you see the instincts where he gets punched and he swings back. You saw a lot of his grappling instincts there. Joe, what are you looking for in this fight? Personally, I don't know how I could go with anybody but Bader. He's a minus 380 favorite.
Yeah. I think in this case, it's the youth factor. Speed kills. I think Ryan Bader's going to have to use his speed and his footwork. And just, you got to always respect Fedor's power. And because he can throw anything from anywhere, I know people complain about his looping punches and stuff like that. Irrelevant, because when they land, it's almost game over. So especially the overhand right. Be careful of the clinch. I know you're a wrestler by trade. You have no problem engaging with any other human being, especially someone that you may believe you've got the upper hand on in wrestling. Don't bother. Just use your speed. Use your what you have there for you against your opponent. So I think if Ryan can play this smart, use his angles, be careful of Fedor, just chip away, man. Chip away. You don't have to end it in the first round. Chip away, wait till he makes that mistake, and then go in there for the finish, but always be cognizant of you're dealing with the guy. Forget the dad bod. He's got strength. And when it comes to the grappling, if you do decide to go down to the mat, man, get your finish. Get your finish fast, get your finish quick, get out of there. If not, you could find yourself in trouble because Fedor doesn't need much room to make him pay. So I am leaning towards Ryan Bader in this fight here. I can't wait for it to happen because if Bader does win, I'm interested in his post-fight interview. If, boom, call out DC or say something about the UFC or do something because now, the guy that he wanted to fight is also a heavyweight champion in the division, in the promotion he used to compete with. So could get really interesting to see how this all works out there. Now, if Fedor wins, what are we going to be saying Sunday morning? That's the real question.
James, I'm going to get your full breakdown of this, but you look at the Fedor resume. He beat Chael Sonnen, a middleweight. He beat Frank Mir, completely washed. He lost to Mitrione. He probably should have lost to Fabio Maldonado. What is Jaideep Singh? I don't know what or who that is. And before that, he hadn't fought since the Pedro Hizzo fight, the Satoshi Ishii fight. I'm looking at that, and I'm like, all things considered, Satoshi Ishii was probably the best opponent that he fought in that stretch, and that is not a very it's not a big endorsement. He beat Jeff Monson before that, but now we're getting into 7, 8 years ago. What does Fedor have left? Obviously, he has enough to go 7-1 over this stretch, but against very questionable talent. Ryan Bader is not questionable talent.
The interesting thing here, though, is that Fedor still has knockout power. I mean, we saw that against Chael. That's still a dangerous weapon. And what's interesting with Ryan Bader is that all of his losses are by stoppage. And we know, granted, Fedor is not Anthony Rumble Johnson, but still, I mean, it's one of those things where we have seen Bader clip before. And we should mention the Mitrione fight. That could have gone either way. I mean, they both punched each other. Mitrione was the one who happened to get up, and it sort of ended that way. But yeah, I think honestly, if Bader had not fought Mitrione and fought someone else and got in the finals, I might have been leaning a little bit more towards Fedor. But that win over Mitrione was huge. Mitrione is a legit heavyweight, and Bader completely dominated him. Like Mitrione was not in that fight whatsoever, and that to me really said that this guy can compete at heavyweight. So I think you'd have to favor Bader here as far as the matchup goes. Wrestling wise, I think, and like Joe mentioned, the speed, I think that will be too much. But again, Fedor has a puncher's chance. If you have a puncher's chance, you're in a fight, especially at heavyweight. So I think if we're looking at the odds here, which we haven't even talked about, I'm looking right now, it's minus 380 for Bader, Emelianenko plus 315. The value on this fight's on Fedor because he could land a shot. It could end. Fedor at minus 330. He probably will win. You know, whether it's a decision or a stoppage. I mean, the fact that it's 5 rounds, you know, lets me know it's a decision. And actually, the fight does not go to the decision prop is minus 505. Fight goes to a decision is plus 335. So I think that tells you everything you need to know that there will be a finish in this fight. But again, you can't ignore the knockout power of Fedor. As lackluster as his competition has been over the 7-1 stretch, he's still got a puncher's chance. So for that reason, the value to me on this fight is on Fedor, but Bader should win this fight.
That's the only fight I can really find odds on at this point. And I tell you what, I still got 5 on it. I got 5 on Fedor. It's worth it. And hey, I got 5 on it's worked out real well this past weekend. We'll talk about that momentarily. But if Ryan Bader were to win, let's look back at his legacy and his resume. Now, whether or not they were where they were at any given point in their careers, you're talking Fedor, King Mo, Phil Davis, Antonio Rogerio Nogueira, Ilir Latifi, who is still a very high-level light heavyweight, Rashad Evans, Phil Davis again, OSP, a former title challenger, Fei Zhao, a former Strikeforce champion, Matt Yashenko, a pioneer, Rampage Jackson, another one over Rogerio Nogueira. And then you go back and you even see like the Keith Jardines of the world. The guy has been around for a long time. Ryan Bader emerged in the summer of 2008. Here he is in 2019 competing for a heavyweight title against the guy who was considered by many the greatest fighter of all time at that point. It's unbelievable. James, what do you have on the docket for your Bellator coverage this week?
Well, we got the open workouts tomorrow, which they don't normally do, or they usually combine it with the media day. So there's actually a separate day for the open workouts on Wednesday. So I'll be getting there for that. And then media days on Thursday. And then, of course, the weigh-ins Friday, early morning weigh-ins, regular weigh-ins, and then the event on Saturday. But I'm going to try and line some stuff out. Like outside of media day, try and do some more video game and fighter interviews, just do something different because we're all going to get the same interviews pretty much as we can. But one thing I like about Bellator is that usually when they do sort of the media day and stuff, they really make sure you get everyone. I know with the UFC, it's like you get an hour on media day, you got to get whoever you can. And if you don't, you're screwed. So I'm going to try obviously getting as much as I can. I actually switched my hotel. So I'm not staying at the fighter hotel, but I'm staying very close by. So I will be, going there after all the media stuff. So we'll see. I'm going to put a TBA next to that because, I have some things lined up, but I want to make sure they actually pan out before I, promise our listeners here, something great. But I will get some really good stuff outside of the media stuff.